very, very special guest speaker. I'm sure, are you listening to me? We're ready to start. Good afternoon. I'm glad you're here. It's a beautiful day with a beautiful program in store and lots to learn. We learn from those who were here before you. And John Bartlett is a graduate of FIT. Are you? No, John, yes, also of Harvard, right. I'm going to give you his background in a minute, but before that, those of you who are registered students of CL 112, I've had questions. I'm repeating again, as I did last week, your 5 required field trips are due. The deadline is April 28th, 29th even, okay? Let's say 29th, that's a Thursday. Write that down, and those of you who came in, come sit in the first row, fill in these seats. I don't want you back there, I want you down here. Are you registered in this class, you too? Well, you're late. Come down here. There's 2 seats for you in that second row. One more. Okay. Come to the lower amphitheater. Come to this row here. Go in there. Sit down. Yes, that's fine. Perfect. Perfect. Fill in the holes. Are we all set? Okay. Once again, good afternoon. And I have someone here that I have a great admiration and respect for. That's your guest speaker today, John Bartlett. How many of you are familiar with the work of John Bartlett? Raise your hands. Well, today you'll become more familiar because he is very special, very gifted. And I'm going to give you a little background of his. He graduated from Harvard University, and he's a native of Cincinnati. And John Bartlett followed his dreams and enrolled in the menswear program at New York Fashion Institute of Technology, where he also graduated from. To John dealing into menswear after receiving a degree in sociology was a wonderful recipe that helped him gain priceless apprenticeship with menswear gurus like Will Smith, I loved him, Bill Robinson, and Ronaldo Shamask. In 1990, that's why I love to read this. I think when I relived through this, the excitement of that period, we were all in fashion. In 1992, John Bartlett launched his own label and quickly gathered momentum with orders from Bergdorf Goodman, Barney's, etc. John Bartlett was awarded the Perry Ellis Award for Best Newcomer. Then that Perry Ellis also was another one of those great creative souls. Beginning the first menswear recipient ever to receive this honor. Bartlett was honored again by the CFDA in 1997 when he was named Menswear Designer of the Year. Although based in New York, the late 1990s found John working for some time, full-time in Italy. Oh, I love that. Producing the signature collection with the Jenny Group, G-E-N-N-Y Group, that was a very important group, and serving as creative director for Byblos from 1998 to 2000. At the end of 2002, John Bartlett made the decision to put everything in storage and close his company and take a sabbatical in Thailand and Cambodia. Oh, I love this. In the end of 2003, John Bartlett received the industry with a re-entered, I can't read this blown up print, with the industry with a collection level offering the tailored clothing, furnishings, and accessories September 2007, John Bartlett opened his first branded flagship store situated in the heart of the West Village. In fall 2010, John will relaunch a women's collection under the label of John Bartlett. The collection will sit alongside his men's collection in the flagship store in the West Village of New York City. I think I've created enough of an excitement and interest in John that I want him to take me away from here so he can take the podium.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Pardon me. Hi, everybody. I think so, yeah. Okay. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming today. It's really exciting for me to be here. I graduated from FIT in '88. I'll give you a little bit about my history. I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, so I had kind of a very typical Midwestern upbringing. And when I was looking at colleges, I really wanted to come to New York City. But I was accepted into Harvard, so my parents were adamant that I went to Harvard, which was amazing. And what I learned at Harvard, I studied sociology, but what I really learned was that it didn't matter what I studied. It was really about the people that I met and the way that I learned to think. I could have studied finger painting. It would have been the same education. After graduating from Harvard, I followed a lot of my schoolmates back to New York, and I enrolled at FIT. I started taking night classes in women's design, draping, sewing. And my mother used to make fun of me because as a kid, I used to hold my scissors with these two fingers. So for me, like sewing, draping, it was an incredible education because I had never done anything like that before. When I heard about the menswear program at FIT, I decided to enroll full-time. So I joined FIT and was full-time for 2 years. And the cool thing was that I actually worked much harder here at FIT than I really did at Harvard because it was finally something that I really loved and really wanted. One of the great experiences that I had while I was here was that I had a few internships, and I got to work side by side with a lot of the designers who were very important at that time. And one of the things that I really took away from that, and that I always speak to people about now if I'm talking to students or people getting into the industry, is the idea of internships. Because you can be in school, you can be designing the most amazing stuff, but if you're not connected into the industry and really seeing how it's working, the day in, day out, forget it, you're screwed. I really learned a lot. I would do whatever people asked me, and one of the things that, again, because I'm going to really speak from my heart as far as what I've learned and what I really have come to respect in people who are in the industry, is the idea of humility. And when you're a student, or even when you're an employer, the idea of humility is critical. And as a student going into a company, offer to do anything. Don't go in with an attitude. Don't go in to say, oh, I don't do that. You go in and you do whatever it takes, because you never know who that person is that you're working for. That person may rise to the top of that company. And if they remember you and your humility and your devotion to them, or your devotion to the company or to the industry, they're really going to kind of keep that in the back of their mind. So while I was at FIT, I had great internships. I also was an incredible club kid and was out pretty much every night. And to me, that was also a big part of my education. Dressing up every day. Every day I was in a different costume. Sometimes in drag, sometimes not. Platforms, bell bottoms, whatever. And my friend Philip here remembers most of that. And I found that that was a huge part of my own growth, was just my self-expression, my self-exploration through clothing. And to me, again, now, as a 47-year-old man, I don't do that, but I'm still interested in how clothing relates to one's individual expression. Excuse me. So when I began, I graduated from FIT in '88. I worked for a couple of different designers, and yet I always knew that I wanted to start my own collection. I had chosen menswear personally because I could try all the clothes on, and that to me was really important, that I could really relate to it personally. I did study some women's wear, and I had some women's wear experience, but to me, the menswear industry was wide open. And what I found when I was going into that industry was that everything was very conservative, especially in America. Everything was very uptight. Everything was kind of homophobic. There was no sexuality to the clothing, straight or gay. There was no real sensuality to the clothing as there is now. So when I started out, one of the big things I wanted to explore was gender, sexuality, a man's body, and really accentuating what you can do with clothing and a person's form. So in my career, in my experience, my first 5 years, I got a lot of great attention by the press. I got some great orders in the stores, but I also got a lot of resistance because what I was doing in those days was really pushing the boundaries about sexuality, about using men as sex symbols. In women's wear, sexuality, sexy clothing, high heels are pretty much what you see day in, day out. A woman could come down the runway in a bikini and high heels, and they would call that an outfit. But if you sent a man down in a bathing suit and no shirt, the editors wouldn't know where to look. So it was a very interesting time. Those times have also changed a lot, and I think that the menswear industry has caught up to the women's a great deal. So when I began my company, I started with $5,000. I had a small studio in the West Village, and I made about 10 samples. And what I found today, as well as 15 years ago, was that I was going to do everything from making the patterns. I sewed some of the samples. I was doing the selling, the marketing, the personal appearances at the stores. And each of those things is as important as becoming a designer. And now when I meet with students who are in school or who are graduating, one of the things that I really recommend is that, one, you get a lot of retail experience. I opened my own store 2 years ago because I felt like I wasn't in touch with my customer. And I think a lot of designers never work in retail. And again, when you're designing clothing, those clothes, as fantastic as they are ideally going to reach an audience. And if you don't understand, if you don't have that experience of actually selling on a floor and really dealing with the real person, man or woman, and what their needs are, again, it's something that you're going to have to learn one way or the other. So one of the things that I always tell people who are looking to get into the design industry is work first in retail. I really believe that strongly, because if you don't see how things are selling, if you don't see what's working, if you don't see how things fit or what sizes are working and really what the customer wants, what they want to spend for it, then again, you're really at a disadvantage in this market. The other thing that for me, when I'm meeting with students, and I meet a lot of kids, quote unquote, who are looking to get into the industry, I look at their books. And to me, I love to see creativity. I love seeing imagination. I want to see what people have to say, what their themes are, what their sensibility is with color. But most importantly, because of where you're going to be entering the market, I want to see amazing technical drawings. And more times than not, I'll be looking at somebody's flat sketches or their drawings that they've done on the computer, and they will have missed an armhole. There may not be a center seam on the back of a jacket or on the front of a pant, and nothing drives me more crazy. And so please, if you're going to start interviewing in this industry, make sure that your flats are impeccable. And to me, that is about sitting down, take a dumb shirt, put it on the floor, and draw it. Really understand like what an armhole is, what a placket is, how many buttons are on the front of a shirt, what a lapel really looks like. Because if you can't express it, and a lot of students now are drawing on the computer, if you can't express that, then no one's going to hire you. You may have incredible ideas, you may have an incredible sense of personal style, but if you don't understand the real construction of clothing, then again, you're at a real disadvantage in this industry. The other thing that I've learned through the years, through different jobs that I've had, also through my own label, is that there are so many different opportunities in this world of design. Yes, fashion design is one, but also merchandising is an incredibly important aspect to the whole creative process. Resourcing, fabric development, they're all parts of the whole. And I just finished a job with Liz Claiborne, and I had never worked for a big corporation in my life before. And it was an incredible, eye-opening experience because I worked alongside of merchandisers, fabric sourcers, production people, tech designers, tailors, and everybody had a real special talent that created the whole. By myself, I could have some great ideas and I could throw together a collection, but when you're putting together a group of clothing that really has to fit, that has to make it to the store, the merchandiser is an incredible opportunity as a job, and I learned a lot from these other people. The merchandiser that I worked with at Liz Claiborne had studied design. She had come to New York to be a designer, and her second job in the industry was working for a merchandiser. And she found out that she really enjoyed the components of putting together a collection, taking somebody else's ideas and really helping them expand and develop a full collection so that it really made sense. Many times a designer by him or herself can have great ideas, but it's hard for them to see the whole picture. So it's really about collaboration. And that's the other thing that over the years I've really learned is that I can't do it by myself as much as I would like to. I'd love to sit in a room and sketch all day, but you really have to be out there and you really have to ask for help. And a lot of the jobs in the industry are not in design. They are in merchandising, sourcing, tech design, and all of these things are incredible career paths for people that may or may not want to follow design as it is. The industry has changed so much over the years, and when I started out, everybody wanted to sell to Bergdorf Goodman, Barney's. Everybody wanted to have a designer collection. Over the years, what's been fascinating is that a lot of stores, a lot of designer labels have come along that are creating incredible fashion at much more realistic prices. Uniqlo, for example, it's so much more fun to shop there for me than to go to Bergdorf Goodman. J. Crew is another great example. There's a lot of different levels of design, merchandising, and price points now. And like it or not, most of the opportunities in design, marketing, merchandising, production are in what they call mid-tier markets. JCPenney, Kohl's, those are the worlds that are really growing. The worlds of Barney's, Bergdorf's are fascinating, but it's very rarefied air up there. And more and more kids that I'm meeting are actually getting excited about the idea of working with Target, Uniqlo, Kohl's, Penny's. Those are the worlds where there is a lot of growth. There is some design, but a lot of it is, again, kind of learning who your customer is and going after that. And again, I'm coming back to the idea of retail. I opened my store so that I could really meet my customer. And so much of what design is understanding who your customer is. And a lot of times, I'm sure in design classes, they'll say, who's your customer? Well, she's 17, she wants to dress like Lady Gaga, and that's costume, and it's fabulous. But I think it's really important. There are so many different segments of the market that need to be addressed. And again, not to burst anybody's bubble, but the whole the reality of the world of Project Runway, where everybody wants to have a fashion show. I mean, those are incredible things. That's very, very exciting, and that's probably, for some reasons, why I got into this world. But again, the industry is very different than what you see on Project Runway. It takes a lot of money, and it takes a lot of connections. And so my recommendation to people is go work for people. Work for 10 years for somebody else. Learn by their mistakes. The idea of having your own label is really exciting, but unless you have a couple $1 million to kind of burn through in 3 years, it's really, personally, I don't advise it. And it's a wonderful thing. It's very egocentric and exciting, but the reality is really try to learn from other people. And that's where I come back to the idea of humility, because the industry has a lot to teach us. And I learned at Liz Claiborne a lot of things that I had never learned before. Part of my career was spent in Italy. I had started working in menswear. I gained a lot of attention for what I was doing, and I was brought into a big company in Italy to manufacture my menswear. They also helped me launch my womenswear. And for me, designing for women was very, very exciting because Menswear doesn't change. It's a shirt, a jacket, and a pant. The shapes may change, the patterns may change, but really you're kind of working within the parameters of a very understandable group of clothing. With women's wear, it changes all the time, and that was very exciting for me. But what I learned was that because that field is so open, I had to be so much more clear about who my customer was and be very, very committed to that. Every fashion show that I would have, or every market appointment that I would have with the fashion director of Neiman's or Bergdorf's or Barney's, each of those people would have a different idea of what they felt I should be doing. Oh, John, you need more beading in this. You need more ruffles. I want to see more chiffon, et cetera, et cetera. And I would try to respond to that, only to find that the next season they would come in and tell me something completely different. So what was interesting and kind of sad to me was that over the years, I lost really who I was because I would listen to so many other people. And it's great to respond, it's great to listen to other people's advice, but unless you're really clear about who you are and what you have to offer to this industry, you're going to kind of get lost in what everybody else is projecting onto you. So fast forward, I worked for big companies, I took some time off. When I turned 40, I took a sabbatical. I put everything in storage, and I had really wanted to kind of try to find out who I was besides a designer. And I had gotten very involved in yoga and meditation, Buddhism. So I decided to go to Thailand. I went to Cambodia, and I took some time away from the industry because the industry has a lot of noise. And again, unless you're really clear about who you are, you can kind of get swallowed up by it. So the year that I took off was amazing because it helped me kind of center myself, find out what was important to me, and it's made me a better person, I think a better designer, and a little bit more balanced in my world. And now when I approach the industry, I do what my heart tells me to do. I work really, really hard, and I try to kind of block out all the noise that's going on around me. There's a lot of incredible people in this industry, a lot of amazing egos, and I think that many times designers and students and creative people will look what's happening in the magazine and think that's the only thing going on. In this world now in fashion, there's the internet business, which is growing leaps and bounds. A lot of designers have only an internet business and don't sell to any retailers. There are so many different ways to approach this world, and really now there are more options than others. There's more options than ever. But the bottom line is that it's very, very important to be clear about who you are and where you sit. Again, going back to Project Runway, I could never, if I was on that show, I would get thrown out in the first round because the designers there are working so fast and so furiously. But I think that when you're watching what they're doing, it's not really reality. And it's very important to feel creative, to feel inspired. But at the same time, it's so important to really get into the world and do as many internships as you can, work in retail, and get on the floor, meet people. And before I show you a little bit about my work today, the other thing which I think is so important, and it sounds really, really corny, but it's, again, one of my pet peeves that drives me crazy, besides somebody that doesn't draw an armhole on their flat. When you go into an interview, when you meet anybody, if you don't have a good handshake, forget it. Men, women, and I know it sounds so silly, but it's something that I say all the time. You got to have a great handshake. It really shows you, expresses to the person that you're meeting, I'm really comfortable with myself. I'm really confident in myself. If you offer them your hand and it's like this wet fish, again, they're going to take that with them. So these are really corny things, but to me, they're really important. It's how you present yourself, much, much more than anything else, because you can be embraced by this industry for so many reasons, but a lot of it is, how you come across in that first interview and looking somebody in the eye and the sense of humility. That to me are the most key things that I really look for when I'm looking to hire a designer, a merchandiser, anybody. So the work I'm going to show you now, I did a show for Fashion Week in February, and it was the first show that I was reintroducing my women's collection. I had done my women's collection, and my last season was spring 2001. By that time, when I look back at those pictures, it was a fabulous show. It probably cost about $100,000 to produce. But when I looked at it, I didn't recognize myself anymore in the work. I had a lot of people around me. I had a couple of assistants. I had a lot of people telling me how fabulous everything was. And the clothes were beautiful, but I didn't relate to them. So now, going back, I wanted to relaunch my women's in a way that meant something to me. And it was a really wonderful experience because I felt finally, okay, this is what I'm about. It may not be fabulous. Lady Gaga may not want to wear it. There's no shoulder pads. There's definitely no fur, which is a whole other thing I'm going to talk about. But it was really true to me. So I'm going to show you a little bit now. All right, I'm going to press this. So for fall 2010, what I've really gotten into has been pattern work, a lot of tailoring, and for my men, it's very much about real masculinity as I see it. A lot of the menswear that you see now, it's very much, it's more like little boys. And my customer, now that I've met him in my store, is a man. He's in his 30s, 40s, early 50s. He's not, he doesn't have like a size 26 waist. He's got a real body, and he wants to feel like a man. And the same thing for my woman. She wants to feel like a woman. So this first outfit, I wanted to kind of return to the idea of longer coats, a lot of drama, and to me, a lot of pattern is very, very important. Now, one thing I wanted to mention about my collection is that mostly everything I'm producing is in the United States. For many years, I produced in Italy, but I moved it all back to the States because I wanted to be able to get on the subway and go work with the tailors, go work with the factories. And in this industry right now, the garment center is really fighting to maintain the factories that are there now. So much work has now gone to Asia, but now there's this whole renewed interest in bringing work back to the United States. So when I reintroduced women's, I worked with the same tailors, the same pattern makers, a lot of the same fabrics as I did for my men. What I wanted to show, what I wanted to offer women was something that I don't find that they can find anywhere else. Great tailoring, clothing that they're not in a high heel necessarily in, something that really shows a lot of self-confidence. And what's interesting, again, to me as a gay man, I have a lot of gay women that come into my store or that I meet at events who say, I want to wear what you're wearing. I want to buy what you're showing in your store. And so for years, I had been listening to every retailer, I need more chiffon, it's got to be more feminine, et cetera, et cetera. And now, as I'm returning into my women's wear, I'm like, screw that, I'm doing what I love. And there's a woman out there for me who wants to wear menswear inspired clothing tailored to her body. So for me, what I show for men, I'm showing for women. A lot of the fabrics are the same. And what I've grown to really love in my own work is very classic proportions, classic fabrics, but really working with pattern on pattern on pattern. This woman here is wearing a really wonderful, it was a brown, what's the jacket? A brown velvet jacket, a beautiful Japanese fabric tweed vest, a very tone-on-tone plaid shirt, and a tartan tie. And I love the play of patterns that you typically find in menswear. I wanted to offer that to women as well. I do a lot of things that I'm inspired by from the 70s. That was kind of my era in the sense that that was really when I was a teenager. So a lot of my visual cues come from that period. So to me, this is one of the great kind of feelings of the 70s. Plaid pants were very important then. Again, for me, in this period in my creative life, I'm really doing much cleaner lines, more minimalist, but still with a flair of pattern. One of my favorite suits from the collection is this Velveteen chocolate brown pinstripe three-piece suit. Again, three-piece suits are kind of making a comeback, and what I did with this actually is I flared the leg, so again, it had a real 70s feeling to it. I paired it with a dark green shirt and a tartan bow tie. And the model, to me, when he came in for the casting, he's an English guy. To me, he really spoke to the 70s. So I loved really fitting him into this suit. He was kind of like a young rocker from the band The Who or the early Rolling Stones. Another thing that I love, I did a lot of tailoring, but I paired this one in particular, with breeches. Pants to me are really important for men and for women, and a lot of pants, of course, are very long, some are flared, some are full, but I wanted to do something that had the feeling of equestrian. So I paired this jacket, which is a belted jacket. The belt, the front belt's actually button off, so you can choose to wear it with a belt or not. The jacket is in a Japanese brown tweed fabric. And again, I played a lot with textures, the green striped shirt, the purple and brown plaid tie, and then the pants are like a velveteen breeches. And I showed all of these outfits with Frye boots. I like to look at American brands for my inspiration in accessories, so I worked with Frye, and all of the shoes were from Frye. So again, I took the idea of things that I love for men and shrunk them down for the girls. I took the waistcoat, which is a very important trend in menswear, in a beautiful tweed fabric. It's kind of like a Shetland tweed, and shrunk it down for her, but with the same kind of tartan plaid shorts that I offer for men, a brown velveteen breeches, high boots, and then these great elbow-length driving gloves. A lot of the feeling of the collection is very much about the outdoors. And so I worked with a great makeup artist whose name is Dick Page, and he's the creative director of Shiseido in Japan. So on both the men and the women, he gave them kind of a very outdoorsy, rosy feeling to their cheeks. And so to me, it just gave a nice sensibility to the collection. This is, again, a different idea of tailoring, taking a vest and a pant in the same materials, making it a new kind of suit. And then I did a merino turtleneck, stripes, and then did what I call my sleeve scarf. It looks like a sleeve when it's laid out on the floor in striped cable knit. I work a lot in cashmere. So this was basically like a cashmere racing sweater, again with the breeches, the hiking boots, again a very kind of virile, masculine, outdoorsy feeling. Then I took the same idea for girls. A great cashmere sweater. This sweater actually has a whole different color on the back. So I work a lot with very, very classic shapes, V-necks, button-downs, things that are real American in their sensibility, and paired these with breeches. A lot of American sensibility and style, I think, is inspired by the East Coast, equestrian, women who aren't afraid to show their masculine side. So I took, again, the same ideas of tailoring, shrunk it down for girls, but gave them a very, I guess, it's kind of like to the manner born feeling. But in my casting, I wanted to make sure that there was enough diversity so that it wasn't just about, Anglo-Saxon white people. Again, the idea of matching sweater and scarf, the tweed pants, a little bit high-waisted. This is a model who I'd used in the late 90s, whose name is Shirley. And the other thing that I wanted to do with my collection, when you look at a lot of the fashion shows, all of the girls are amazing Amazons. They're all probably, now there's a kind of an age limit. They're 16 to 19. They're all probably 5'11". That's kind of the height that I think most runway models are. But more and more, a lot of designers, I know Marc Jacobs did this for Louis Vuitton, but more designers are using women that are a little bit more mature. Shirley was an incredibly popular model in the 90s. She was a Sports Illustrated swimwear model, etc. And she had done a lot of my shows back then. And so I brought her back, and I showed her in this tweed skirt, the cowboy boots, and a leather shirt. Using, again, the same tweed fabrics, I did a belted Chesterfield. And then I moved on to a different group. This gentleman is wearing a corduroy trench coat. So I take a lot of ideas that, again, are very iconic. And this is something that's important for designers to understand with the idea of merchandising in mind. When you're building a collection, it's really important to understand, okay, I need for example, in menswear, I need a 2-button jacket. I need a short jacket, a medium jacket, a long coat. So it's important to have kind of levels of product in your line. So to me, this is kind of a nice contrast to the maxi coat that I showed in the beginning, taking the idea of trench but doing it in black corduroy. And again, one of my favorite models, she looked to me when she came in for her casting as though she was out of the 1920s. And a lot of the women that I cast in the show were either from Russia or from Brazil, and that seems to be where a lot of the models are coming from for women. So to me, she spoke of the 1920s, very androgynous looking, again, a shrunken vest and a pair of high-waisted pants in a navy boucle fabric. Color's important to me, and in fall, it's hard because most people wear black, chocolate brown, charcoal, navy, so it's important to have a hit of color here and there, and it really stands out. So the one color that I've started using is purple, and I love this imperial purple cashmere v-neck. I contrasted the waistband, the cuffs with another color, and then the back is a whole color completely different. The other thing that I like is matching my shirts and my ties together. Again, these are little formulas that I've developed that I love, that work for me. I think everybody comes up with what they're comfortable with, and I found as a designer, I'm always circling around the same ideas rather than, you know, one season it looks like this, the next season it looks like that. I think when the market is looking at you, if you're showing or if you're working, they want to see consistency, they want to see evolution, but they want to see that you are really committed to a particular look. Also with my casting, I use a lot of guys who aren't necessarily models. This gentleman, again, is in his mid-30s, but to me, he really embodied the John Bartlett man. Very masculine, virile, sexy, bearded, and a little bit to the left. He's not like your perfect model. There's a sensuality to him that to me really speaks, especially when you're doing a runway show. These editors who are going to 100 shows a week are seeing the same 10 models, so it's really exciting for them. It kind of wakes them up to see somebody who's not from that world walking the runway alongside the models who are kind of the models of that particular season. For me, I've always looked at military for inspiration, and in menswear, military is one of those great places that you can find amazing details, a lot of imagery. So to me, what I did is I took one of my favorite belts, which is called a Sam Browne belt, but I did it in navy leather rather than black. And I paired it with a checkered jacket, a pair of black corduroy breeches, and then a purple shirt and tie. And this gentleman I like as a model very much. He's his background is Japanese and Irish, and he really speaks to the new face of who our world is. Again, a really beautiful girl that I met who came into casting. To me, she also spoke the 20s, from Russia. Great look, and so for this young lady, I had a really great Argyle sweater. Again, the breeches, the high-waisted pants, and what I did with the hair and makeup was very, very simple. I didn't want something. I wanted them to look as though they just basically gotten out of bed, and it was very, very natural. And I've done a lot of shows with really elaborate hair and makeup, and to me, personally, that didn't feel like it was me. So as I'm standing for something and committing to a particular look, to me, that's about being very natural, very open, and being very honest. This gentleman is wearing a black corduroy vest and pants. So again, the idea that suits don't always have to have a jacket. A lot of guys that I'm selling in the store are buying a vest and pant in the same fabric, rather than always needing to wear a blazer, which really speaks to how casual the fashion world has become. This fabulous woman is named Edwige, and Edwige as well had done my shows in the late 90s, and I think even then she was probably in her mid-30s. Edwige is probably 52, 53. She's a chanteuse, French, a real kind of downtown personality, and again, she's not the most beautiful, stunning catwalk model that you could ask for, but what she really brought was a sense of individuality, and she really spoke to the audience. She actually started talking to the audience, and people started clapping and laughing because she was engaging with them. She wasn't this kind of robot walking up and down the catwalk. She was a real human being wearing the clothing. this woman, Gigi, I had met, and again, I had wanted some women who were not the perfect size 4 or 2, which a lot of the models are now. Gigi. I guess I'll speak over it. So Gigi is in her early 50s. Again, she's got a really beautiful body. She's got a real body, though. And what I wanted to show again was just the diversity of what beauty is about. So Gigi is, she's a photographer. She's got a real life. And I think that she really speaks to the idea that there's a lot of different types of women in the market. They're not all super tall and super thin. Thank you. For evening, I showed a military suit. This is in a cotton sateen, plain white shirt, bow tie, very, very handsome guy, a little bit of flare in the leg, and a fry boot. Again, it's really important at the end for me in a show to show a little bit of the evening. And so for the last model, I used, again, a pretty famous model from the 90s, Jenny Shimizu. And Jenny is openly gay, lesbian, and I really wanted to speak to that customer who is looking for this type of look. And I saw a lot of blogs, again, especially in the gay women's world, talking about this look, and they want to dress like this. And what was exciting to me was I got a lot of women coming back after the show who aren't gay, who are just looking for great clothes that aren't overcomplicated, who said, I want to look like Jenny. And it was really interesting to me because, again, it's very, very simple clothing, beautiful make, I paid a lot of attention to the tailoring and the detailing, but it's not a science project. And I think as a designer, when I first started out, I thought everything had to be this incredible show-stopping piece that was very difficult to produce. And yes, it is important in some shows to have pieces that will never be produced, but it's also about realness. And that's kind of what I bring to this market. And I think that after all these years, it's really what I kind of want to stand for at this time in my life. And as a designer, one of the things that's been really interesting to me, when I went to Harvard, I studied sociology. And when I graduated, I said, I want to be a social worker because I can do a lot more. I can do work with the community. I can give back. And my dad had said to me, John, you have to do what you love. And if you do what you love, you can give back to the community so much more than if you are working necessarily as a social worker. And what I've really loved about my career is that I'm able to really work with the community. And so, yes, I'm a designer, but a lot of what I do now is work with different organizations, whether it's with animal rescue, whether it's working with the elderly or the young kids. There's a wonderful group called the Trevor Project that reaches out to teens who are gay and lesbian that are, it's basically a suicide line. So what's been important to me has been to continue with my work, but also to really try to round myself out. And that's, again, something that I so recommend to people is get into the community, do something that interests you and your world. And you not only grow as a person, but you really can grow as an individual, and it's amazing who you meet. The last thing I just wanted to say that, again, just being as honest as I can, there's so much going on in our world about consciousness, about the environment. And one thing that I had noticed this fall with the shows was that there was this incredible return to using fur. And I think I had read that 2/3 of the designers had used fur in their collections, which was kind of unheard of. Fur had kind of gone away, and then suddenly fur was everywhere. And it really woke me up. I learned that a lot of fur companies are going after young designers, courting them, making free samples for them, supporting their fashion shows. And to me, my own personal stance is that fur is not where we should be going. And I guess maybe as I've grown and done a lot of research just about where we are in our world, we're all in this together, and the animals are a big part of our lives. The animals have families and they have feelings, And again, as corny as it sounds, to me, fur is just not the direction that I recommend personally for fashion. I think working in fur is very vain and irresponsible, and there's a huge movement in the fashion industry to use fur. And I talked to a lot of designers who had used fur for their collections, and they said, well, the animals were being humanely, quote unquote, gassed. And I'm like, gassed? I mean, like Hitler. And so it's really important, if you want to explore fur, you know, make your own decisions about this, but do your research. Look at the Humane Society, look at all the videos about how fur comes to you, how the animals are killed for their fur, and you'll make your own decisions. But that's something that's very personal to me, and it's something that is becoming part of my platform. And interestingly, since becoming much more aware about fur over the last few months, I've also decided that this will be the last season that I'll work in leather. Because a lot of people said, well, you work in leather, what's the difference? And I'm like, you know what, in a way you're right. So I'm not gonna produce the leather pieces that I made for my show. I'm gonna move now into using fake leather. And I realized that my own vanity, my own creative vanity, working in leather is amazing. But at the end of the day, when I think about the animals that are being used for their skins, they're being used for food even, it just doesn't make me feel good anymore. And so as a designer, a big part of my change and my evolution is becoming more aware of the planet. And I'm sorry for that part of my discourse, but I feel very strongly about that. So that's where I am in my life right now. And I'm wondering if anybody has any questions. Please. Yeah. Well, part of my journey when I was when I had taken time off, I adopted a dog from North Shore Animal League, which is one of the places that I do a lot of work. And his name's Tiny Tim, and he had lost his leg on Christmas Eve. So he's a three-legged mutt, Rottweiler, Shepherd, Pit Bull, and he then slowly became the mascot, my icon for my clothing. So I use a lot of his imagery I use him as an embroidery. I'm actually developing a Tiny Tim camouflage for spring. So he has become kind of an icon for my work. And we're actually, if anybody's interested, my store is down on 7th Avenue and Charles Street, and this Saturday we're doing an adoption event with North Shore Animal League. So yes, that's become a big part of what's made me feel good about being a designer. Yeah, he's a cutie. That's my dog, yeah. Thank you. His name's Tiny Tim. No. Yes, please. Well, I've done, actually, when I worked with Liz Claiborne, I traveled through Asia, and it was incredible because so much of the production that used to be done in Italy has moved to Asia. The prices in Italy are very expensive with the euro. It's moved to Asia. I don't know, I'm really torn because there are certain things that you can do there that you can't find here. But when I think about the carbon footprint more and more, I think about, okay, if I'm gonna make something there, I'm gonna jet it over here. That's that much more fuel than if I get on a subway. The challenge in producing in the States is that it's actually much, much more expensive to produce here versus Asia, for example, Indonesia. But there's a lot of manufacturing being done there, and I think entering into this industry, you probably would travel there, and it's an incredible experience just learning. But I feel that production, I like bringing it back to the States. I feel very proud about the idea of making in America. I don't know if the customer cares that much, that what they really want is something that they love. They don't care where it's made, but knowing that it's giving jobs here, that I'm keeping it local, and that I'm getting on a subway to go see it, to me is very important. Please. Well, I guess like on a personal level, because working in this industry and showing, pardon me, showing collections all over the world, I got very full of myself, and I started believing all of my own press. And so going to Thailand and Cambodia, where it's Buddhism and Hinduism, mostly, I learned a lot about the idea of humility. And also what I really got from that was just the mix of East and West. So a lot of my work is inspired by the East as well. But I think that what maybe I got from that was just an idea of being more centered and trying not to take myself too seriously too. Please. Well, it comes from everywhere. I look at a lot of films. I look at one of the things that I learned after college that then I kind of studied on my own was fine arts. And so I took a few courses in fine arts. But to me, painting, going to MoMA, I go to MoMA a lot, and there's certain paintings that I go to over and over and over again, whether it's for palette or for pattern. But a lot of my inspiration really comes from film. And I don't really look at what a celebrity is wearing today as much as I look at maybe what an actor was wearing in the 20s or the 70s. And this collection was actually inspired by a film called Women in Love, which was made in the early 70s. And personally, I really get off on the 20s as inspired by the 70s. And so, there's lots of eras that inspire me, but really it's film, photography, but more importantly is the raw materials. I will look at a lot of inspiration from characters, but a lot of it is, what fabrics I'm seeing, and those fabrics, kind of like when a sculptor's looking at stone, those fabrics will tell me what they want to be. So a lot of it begins from there. Please. Well, one of the things, again, that I've learned, because I've been doing this for 400 years now, is that there's I think a movement towards smaller companies, more personal companies, where you can really go and have a personal experience. Yes, there's the whole internet thing, which is very different. But I'm finding that a lot of people want to, and I personally like to do this, I like to go to small stores. So my plan is to start opening more stores, more of my own retail stores versus wholesaling, because I'm making more money that way. I'm getting to provide a much more personal experience. And then having to relaunch the women's, I'd like to open more stores for women. So my trajectory for the next 5 years is to open more stores in a few more locations in New York City, and then in the major cities in the country, and then perhaps find partners in other countries to develop. But at the same time, because I love what I do, I don't really care as much as I used to whether my name's on the label or not. So I'm also looking always for other companies that are doing something interesting. There's a company out of Vancouver called Lululemon that is an incredible yoga line. And I do a lot of yoga, so I've approached them about designing a small capsule collection for them of yoga clothes. So there's all these different companies doing interesting things that do it very, very well. And I like to approach them and say, what can I do with you guys? So it's kind of partly, developing my own retail concepts, and then partly working with other very interesting companies that are doing things that speak to me. Please. I do. It's interesting. It hasn't been. There's been a lot of resistance to using sustainable fabrics and organic cottons. Organic cottons, for example, are more expensive than regular cotton. So a lot of people who are, really thinking about the bottom line won't use them. Bamboo fabrics, for example. There's so many fabrics coming out that are incredible, and I haven't really used them as I would like to at all. I'm kind of stuck personally in fabrics that I love using, And yet there are so many new things coming out. And actually one thing that I'm working with now, which I never thought I would, is polyester, because there's a lot of recycled polyester that is coming through that's really amazing. But speaking to the sustainability, carbon footprint, et cetera, I do work with a factory in India, and one of the things that they offer is they do everything off the grid. So they have kick pedal machines, they use coal irons, so they don't use any electricity when they manufacture the clothes. But then the challenge is then I have to fly the clothes here and use fuel. So there's all these different parts to that equation. But yeah, the sustainability thing is huge, especially with bamboo. That's become a really important fiber. Please. Well, good question. It's really hard. I mean, I have to say that when I started in the business, and there still are a lot of big personalities, and there was kind of this cliche of the fashion designer who's really fabulous and out there and, you know, very full of what they were about. And I mean, not that I don't have an ego, but I think more and more there are a lot of people relating to designers who are just being more self-effacing. I don't know. That's a really good question, because you do have to be out there. You have to be very, very confident in what you're about and who you are and meet everybody that you can. But at the same time, to me, the humility part is very sexy, and that's what I really appreciate when I meet somebody. Please. Well, it's interesting because when I first started, I wanted to design clothing that I could wear out, hopefully for that night in a club somewhere. And then when I got into women's, at first it was very daunting because I couldn't try the clothes on, I couldn't experience it directly, so I had to really rely on a lot of the women in my life to say, I would never wear that, I've got issues with my arms, et cetera, et cetera. But then as I started meeting more and more women who were kind of free from the labels of female, male, you know, I've never wear that because it's too masculine. I started thinking about, for me, what was important was letting the clothes speak for themselves. But it's really hard, and gender to me is a really fascinating aspect of fashion. And when you see most of the shows, again, it's a very sexualized, very, very feminine thing. And what's interesting now, there's a lot more curvy models on the runway. But it's kind of one look. It's high heels, it's tight clothes, it's sexy, but there's not a lot of depth, personally, to it. And when menswear inspiration comes into women's wear, a lot of times it's still done with ruffles and beading, etc. But what I like is the honesty of real menswear fabrics. And a lot of the women that want to wear my clothes want that same quality, the same tailoring, the same craftsmanship that the menswear has, but just fit for their body. But to me, there's nothing sexier than a woman in a men's suit. I think it's fascinating. And what's cool for women, and I was always jealous of my sister growing up, was that she got to play with Barbies and she played football. Women get to experiment with both genders. For men, it's much harder. And I learned that early on, that to be feminine as a man was a bad thing, but to be masculine and as a woman was very cool. So there's a lot of gender that comes into this, and I had studied sociology, and a lot of my studies were about gender identity. And more as there's men, women, female to male, male to female, and people identifying or not identifying as gender, clothing has, you know, an even more interesting role. Yep. Well, actually, again, because I'm from the old school where I draw everything, But when I had the opportunity to work at Liz Claiborne, the designers that were assisting me all worked on computer, and I was so jealous of them because I had never learned how to do that. And there's a lot that you actually can do designing on a computer that you can't do by hand. Computer-generated prints are very exciting. It's much faster. So I think that the way that technology is moving, the way that if we're making in Asia, for example, you're sending tech packs over the computer. Everything's done by the computer. It's just the way of the world right now. But at the same time, it's very important to be able to touch and feel and have a personal experience. But I wish that I could design a computer. Right, and I do think, again, I mean, in fashion, designing clothing, I mean, it's so important to touch, have that tactile experience, to really sit in on a fitting and learn, in three-dimensional form how something's working. And you can only go so far with a computer when you're drawing flats, but we're in the information age, and as fast as you can get it out there, just things are moving very, very fast. I think so. Yeah, sorry, Alice. Thank you all so much. Appreciate it. Oh, sorry, one more question.
I've known John for 20 years, and there's one thing that he's learned, and it's taught me from we don't need ego to survive, but we don't need ego to retire.
Yeah. Fashion shows are really, it's a kind of a conundrum because many times the retailers have already seen your collection, they've already bought it, and the fashion shows are really for PR, marketing, press, and more importantly, now that those images are online immediately so that you can take your images and anybody all over the world can see them. Fashion shows tend to cost, if you're showing in Bryant Park, for example, just to get into the space without doing anything to it, about $35,000 just for the smallest space. So fashion shows can run on an average of about $100,000. Yes, you can do them for a lot less, but then you really compromise on the quality of the lighting and the sound and all these things that really make a fashion show important when you're sending a picture all over the world. So fashion shows have gotten very, very expensive. For me, they're important, and I don't always do them. Sometimes I'll do a presentation, but they're important because there's nothing like seeing clothes moving and having the emotion of a real experience in real time. So to me, fashion shows are important. They're a lot of work, but there's nothing more exciting because it really, you have like a deadline, the lights are going up, you got to get ready. So there's nothing more exciting to do that, but I don't believe that every line and every part of the market should be doing fashion shows. Thank you guys so much. Thanks. So I'll let you